The engine of the massive semi-truck groaned like a wounded beast, a sound that mirrored the heavy heart of the man behind the steering wheel. Elias was a long-haul trucker who had spent more years on the asphalt than in a proper home. He was a man of cold logic and hardened cynicism, traits he had adopted as armor after the world took everything from him. It had been exactly 2 years since the accident that claimed his young daughter, Maya. Since that day, Elias had lost his faith in everything. He lived in a world of grey shadows, driving through the endless night to outrun the memories that refused to leave him. He felt the weight of every mile he had driven since the funeral. To him, a road was just a line on a map, and a life was just a series of miles until the fuel ran out. Tonight, the road felt different. A thick, oppressive fog had swallowed the highway, turning the headlights into twin beams of useless yellow light. He was driving down a desolate stretch of road that locals avoided after the sun went down. This path ran directly alongside the infamous Greywood Cemetery. In the nearby towns, people whispered about the forbidden rule of the road. They said that one must never stop or even look directly at the rusted iron gates of Greywood after the clock strikes midnight. To the residents of the valley, the cemetery was not just a place for the dead, but a hungry entity waiting for a moment of weakness. They called it a mouth that never finished eating. Elias, of course, did not believe in ghost stories. To him, death was final. Yet as the clock on his dashboard flickered to 12:00, his truck began to cough. The powerful engine sputtered and shook, losing momentum with every passing second. Elias cursed, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He checked his gauges, but everything looked normal. Still, the truck was dying. It finally rolled to a crawl right in front of the massive stone walls of the cemetery. The silence that followed the engine death was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the cooling metal. The headlights flickered and dimmed, casting long, dancing shadows across the granite tombstones that lined the perimeter. The darkness outside seemed to press against the glass of the cabin, eager to find a way inside. He stared out of the side window, his heart hammering against his ribs. There, standing perfectly still under the flickering orange glow of a street lamp near the entrance, was a small figure. His breath hitched in his throat, and the air in the cabin suddenly felt freezing. It was a young girl wearing a white dress, the exact same lace dress Maya had been buried in. She stood with her back to him, her small hands folded in front of her. Elias felt a wave of nausea and longing wash over him. His rational mind screamed that it was a trick of the light, a hallucination born of exhaustion. He told himself it was impossible. Maya was gone. She was under the ground in a different city, hundreds of kilometers away. But his heart demanded he check. Elias ignored the warning bells in his head. He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the pavement, a sound that echoed through the silent tombs. He threw the door open, the cold night air hitting him like a blow. As his boots hit the gravel, the massive iron gates of Greywood Cemetery began to creak. They swung open slowly, as if invited by his presence. The little girl turned her head slightly, beckoning him with a small hand before stepping back into the shadows. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Elias took his first step toward the darkness, unable to turn away from his daughter. He felt a strange, magnetic pull, an invisible tether drawing him away from the safety of his vehicle and into the mouth of the graveyard, unaware that the cemetery was already closing in. Elias stepped across the rusted iron gates, and the world behind him seemed to vanish into a wall of grey wool. The temperature did not just drop, it plummeted, turning his warm breath into thick plumes of white vapor that hung in the stagnant air. Every step he took away from the safety of his truck felt like a step into a different dimension where the laws of nature had been rewritten. The ground beneath his heavy leather boots felt soft and spongy, like decaying leaves covering a deep and bottomless abyss. He tried to look back at the lights of his truck, but the road was gone. In its place stood rows of crooked, leaning tombstones that seemed to adjust their positions every time he blinked. The silence was thick, pressing against his eardrums like the pressure of deep water. He called out her name, his voice trembling as he whispered, "Maya." There was no reply, only the scratching of dead branches against cold stone. The fog swirled around his legs with intelligence, beckoning him deeper into the heart of the graveyard. The figure in the white lace dress was always just a few paces ahead, dancing between the marble monuments and the weeping willow trees. Elias followed, his heart a frantic bird trapped within his chest. He reached a central plot, a place of prestige where the monuments were taller and more ornate than the ones at the perimeter. The girl stopped before a massive crypt that looked like a palace for the dead. She stood perfectly still, her back to him, her hands folded as if in prayer. Elias reached out a hand, his fingers inches from her shoulder. He wanted to scoop her up and run, to fix the world that had broken into pieces 2 years ago. When she finally spoke, the sound broke the silence like glass. It was the voice of Maya, clear and sweet, yet layered with a chilling resonance that did not belong to any living child. She asked him why he had let her go. She asked why he was still breathing and walking while she was trapped in the cold darkness of the earth. The words were like poisoned needles, finding every crack in his soul and twisting the guilt he had tried so hard to bury. He realized with a jolt of horror that the face beneath the dark hair was not a face at all, but a shifting mask of grey smoke and hollow, bottomless sockets. This was not his daughter. This was something ancient and hungry that lived on the edge of reality. As the realization dawned on him, the shadows between the graves began to lengthen and rise. These were the unrested, the spirits of those who could not find peace, drawn to the surface by the intensity of the sorrow Elias radiated. They circled him like sharks in a dark and frozen sea, their formless bodies radiating a cold so intense it felt like burning. The creature in the white dress grew taller, its limbs stretching into unnatural proportions. It was a siren of the grave, a scavenger of the spirit world that fed on the broken hearts of the traveling living. It had been waiting for a man like Elias, a man so heavy with sorrow that he was already halfway to the grave before he even stepped out of his truck. Elias felt an invisible force dragging him toward a mound of dirt near the center of the plot. He looked down and saw a headstone that had not been there a moment ago. Carved into the stone was his own name, Elias, followed by the date of that night as his final day. The soil at his feet began to cave in, forming a void that smelled of rot and damp roots. He fought against the pull, but his limbs felt like lead, weighed down by the crushing guilt he had carried since the accident. He felt the cold fingers of the unrested grabbing at his ankles, pulling him down toward the open earth. His vision began to blur as the siren leaned in closer, its mouth opening to reveal a void of endless night. But just as his knees hit the dirt, a different sound reached him through the chaos. It was a faint, ethereal whisper on the wind, a voice filled with love and urgency. It was the real Maya, breathing a vital command into his ear. She told him not to look at their eyes. Elias squeezed his eyes shut until colors danced behind his lids. Do not look at their eyes. The command from Maya echoed in his mind, a lifeline amidst madness. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the freezing cemetery air burning his lungs like swallowed glass. The siren let out a metallic shriek, but Elias blocked it out. He focused on a specific memory of Maya, not in the funeral dress, but at her 5th birthday. He could see her face smeared with cake, her eyes crinkling with joy, and her laughter filling their sunny kitchen. That memory of love was a shield, a warmth that pushed back against the encroaching frost of the tomb. He began to move, his feet heavy as if walking through deep water. He felt the cold, clammy hands of the unrested tugging at his jacket and his jeans, trying to pull him back toward the gaping maw of the earth. He did not open his eyes at all. He listened with an intensity he had never known. Somewhere in the distance, through the unnatural silence of Greywood, he heard a sound more beautiful than any symphony. It was the rhythmic pulse of his truck idling. Thump, 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 thump. It was a heartbeat made of iron and diesel. He scrambled forward, tripping over invisible roots and low headstones, his hands outstretched like a blind man. Suddenly the air grew warm. A scent of lavender and vanilla filled his nose, the exact perfume his late wife used to wear. The scratching sounds of the dead stopped, and the wind died down. Elias felt a soft, warm hand rest against his cheek. He stopped, his heart leaping into his throat. He heard her voice, gentle and melodic, begging him to stay. She told him they could all be together again, that the cold was just a dream. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, but Elias knew it was a lie. He roared out a final goodbye to the ghosts of his past, a scream that tore through the veil. He accepted that they were gone, and in that moment of clarity, the illusion shattered. The warmth vanished, replaced by a scream of predatory rage. Elias sprinted, his eyes squinted as he saw the flickering amber lights of his truck through the thinning fog. He reached the heavy metal door and yanked it open. As he dove into the cabin, he felt long, jagged fingernails rake across the back of his jacket and the metal panels. He slammed it shut and locked it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He did not look back. He grabbed the gear stick, the engine roaring to life with a defiant rumble that shook the ground of Greywood Cemetery. He drove. He did not care about the speed limit as he sped away from that place. He watched the rearview mirror until the fog-shrouded gates were nothing more than a dark smudge on the horizon. As the first pale light of dawn began to bleed across the sky, turning the world into shades of blue and gold, Elias felt the weight in his chest begin to lift. He had survived the night, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt the sun warmth on his skin. Soon, Elias pulled into a brightly lit roadside diner. The smell of fresh coffee and the chatter of travelers felt like a benediction. He sat in his truck briefly, letting the silence settle. He turned toward the passenger seat to grab it, and his heart skipped a beat. Resting on the leather seat was a single, fresh white daisy, Maya's favorite flower. It was vibrant and alive, a sign that her love was real. He tucked the flower into his sun visor, a smile touching his lips. He realized grief is a bridge, but if you linger on it for too long, shadows will claim you. Keep moving, for the living belong to the light, and the dead must remain in the silence.